Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a frontline update for the Ukraine war for the 5th of March 2023. Welcome. Let's get straight to the front line. We're going to the northeast sector, Kupiansk to Svatova to Kremina. My sense is that it's a fairly quiet day, even Bakhmut-wise to some degree. Quite a few sources aren't really reporting much about the front lines. Let's go to look at my map at the Kupiansk to Svatova front line here, and we'll go to ISW for a little bit of a synopsis. So geolocated footage, they say, published on March the 4th, indicates that Russian forces likely secured gains north of Novodvyanye. Goodness. A Russian mill blogger claimed on March the 3rd that Ukrainian forces attempted to attack Russian positions northwest of Svatova near Kupiansk in Vilshana and Liman Pershi. So that is Ukrainian forces attempting to attack back up here. So let's look at Vilshana and Liman Pershi. If my fingers work correctly. So Vilshana here is just to the northeast of Kupiansk and Liman Pershi. So some pushing back from the Ukrainians in that area, arguably. And then we have actually, it's not my fingers, it's my Google Maps not working very well. And then we come further down south, all the way, in fact, past Svatova to Novodvyanye here, and I talked to you yesterday about how there was a little bit of a movement here. I've actually got some Russian gains in that settlement area, so it seems like the ISW is a little bit behind, as often they compile at the end of the day, sometimes sort of 24 hours behind. But yeah, a little bit of movement on the map there. But other than that, not really a lot to say about that whole front line. There's some interesting claims as we come further down. I'll come to that in fact, let's talk about a few of these. ISW has assessed that the closest Russian advances are about 13 kilometers northeast of Kupiansk, and it is unlikely that Russian forces in the area have the capability to rapidly advance 13 kilometers across country and assault Kupiansk itself, if they are able to advance that far at all, which they have not shown the capacity to do. So this is in relation to the claims that, and the Russian military bloggers and information sources are amplifying the notion that the Ukrainians are pulling out vulnerable citizens from Kupiansk, talking about how Kupiansk is under threat from the Russians are going to hit that soon. But the reality is that actually that's far enough away not to be of immediate threat and or immediate risk, considering how slowly the Russians are taking, well, any territory up and down the entire front line, one has to say. They did take some area of Hranikivka here, and then there were claims from the Institute, no, not from the ISW, sorry, from Warmapper, that Hranikivka is now contested again. I have not heard anything about that other than from that source, so I can't verify that at all, so I've kept it as Russian controlled. To continue, there are a number of normal places, so repelled attacks around Tierney, Hurihorivka, Bilorivka, Nevska, Kremina, Spirna, and Vesela. So actually, that's going down south from Bilorivka and Kremina towards Bakhmut, but repelled attacks up and down the front line. A Russian source claimed that Russian and Ukrainian forces hold positions as close to 40 meters away from one another south of Kremina. So this would be in the forested area. It is tough fighting there, very close quarter fighting. Not a lot of movement as far as the front lines go, or at least if there is, the information isn't really coming out. Now, this is I find the quite interesting discussion that the ISW have here. So a BARS 13 commander, so a reserve Russian commander, has stated that the Russian offensive operations in these areas, quote, can hardly be called a full-fledged offensive. This is the idea that actually they aren't really putting in the full effort and resources into a full offensive that we have been awaiting, and this supposedly is. Russian forces are struggling to advance after pushing Ukrainian forces back from positions near Kremlin, so it's kind of stalled. The ISW assesses that Russian forces have likely committed almost the entirety of the 144th and 3rd Motorized Rifle Divisions of the 20th Combined Arms Army of the Western Military District, as well as regiment-sized elements of the 98th, 76th, and 106th Air Assault Division of the Russian Airborne Forces, so VDV. So there's quite a lot of troops being committed here, and quite decent troops, to offensives along the Svatov-Kremlin line. So this is kind of going against what the Russian voice here is saying, that it's not a full-fledged offensive. The ISW is saying, well, actually, it seems like it pretty much is. You've got some decent troops there, and quite a lot of them committed to this offensive. The commitment of the equivalent of 3 divisions to one discrete geographical area, says the ISW, suggests that Russian forces intend to prioritize this axis of advance and make substantial gains in this area. And there's also, of course, talk about how they've got T-90 tanks, which are their best tanks, and they've got the BMP-T Terminator, infantry fighting vehicle with rocket launchers and stuff on top, which are pretty useful. The ISW has previously assessed that ongoing Russian offensive in Luhansk Oblast may already be nearing culmination, because these elements have been committed to decisive offensive operations in this area for some time, and Russian sources are likely trying to set informational conditions for the potential Russian loss of the initiative. So, translated, that means some Russian voices are saying, "Well, we're not really committing a lot to the area. It's not a full-fledged offensive." ISW is saying, "Well, it kind of does look like it is a full-fledged offensive, because you've got this troop, these troops, these troops, these troops, and this equipment, and you've actually got nowhere fast. So by saying it's not a full-fledged offensive, you are setting the information landscape." To prepare people to admit that actually you might well be losing the initiative there. I think that's really interesting discussion. And it plays into this idea that if this really is the Russian offensive, it's pretty underwhelming. And not nearly as significant as we were expecting it to be. Okay, let's move further down south towards Bakhmut. Okay, as we come further down south and past Bilorivka, Shpirny, Vesele, all these places that are seeing quite a lot of activity that do have repelled Russian attacks, we come down to the area of Bykivka, Yehidne, north of Bakhmut towards Kromova and Bodanivka, and we have a couple of reservoirs here. This larger one and one just further to the north. There's quite a bit of activity around. Now, there isn't all that much information, so some general if we go to a general discussion in the ISW at the beginning of their daily report, I think it's worth discussing this. So, Russian forces appear to have secured a sufficient positional advantage to conduct a turning movement against certain parts of Bakhmut, but have not yet forced Ukrainian forces to withdraw, and will likely not be able to encircle the city soon. So they're actually being quite cautious in a sense and saying that no, it's not encircled yet, and in fact doesn't look like it will be encircled anytime particularly in the immediate future. Ukrainian officials have recently reiterated that Ukrainian forces still control the situation in Bakhmut, but have noted that circumstances are increasingly complicated and that the Wagner Group has committed its most advanced and prepared elements to assault operations in the area. So Wagner are going for it, the Russians are going for it, Ukrainians are still holding on. There's lots of information hitting the information space. So Willie OAM has interviews with an Australian fighter again saying that things are tough in Bakhmut. We've got video evidence to suggest there might be doing at least some aspects of an operational withdrawal, some movement of troops moving out of Bakhmut, but then other claims that actually no, they're staying put. So, for example, massive withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from Bakhmut is not taking place, says Flash News here. In fact, just reporting what representative of the Eastern Group of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Serhiy Cherevati, said yesterday, and that was yesterday morning. So that would have been sort of mid-afternoon Ukraine time, or just after lunch Ukraine time. Despite current dire situation around Bakhmut, says Bieliskov, there's some grounds for restraint optimism that the UA will be able to absorb Russian strikes without committing reserves preserved for future offensives. So this is really important. Although there have been some reinforcements sent to Bakhmut, it's not like they've sent overwhelming reinforcements. If Ukraine really wanted to, I think they could have sent a vast number of forces to Bakhmut to support the Ukrainians holding on there. But that would then be dipping into the forces they're planning to use for a counteroffensive. So I think they probably could, but they've chosen not to because I guess the calculation is we need to defend Bakhmut with as few people as possible in order to keep it for as long as possible to fix those Russian troops there and to attrit them as much as possible, but not overcommitting there so that we damage our potential to do further or future proper counteroffensives. There's a really fine line, and I think that's what's going on. So it is tough there, but it's tough not because, oh my goodness, it's all over for Ukraine. I think it's actually looking potentially quite good for Ukraine, that they are planning to do some big things going forward, and they don't want to ruin those big things by sending too many reinforcements to Bakhmut. They just need enough reinforcements to keep the Russians working really hard for every meter of territory that they gain. And I think this is what this is saying. Though this optimism is not reason for complacency, aid to Ukraine need to be doubled down. I actually I get that. I know some people might disagree with that, but I get what's going on there. Now, to go back to ISW, Russian advances in Bakhmut have been slow and gradual and do not suggest that Russian forces will be able to encircle Bakhmut soon. Of course, this is more of the opinion of ISW rather than drawing on the sources. Take this with a pinch of salt. Much less that they will be able to take the city by frontal assaults. The Russians have rather managed to push close enough to critical ground lines of communication from the northeast to threaten Ukrainian withdrawal routes in a classical turning movement. The purpose of a turning movement is to force the enemy to abandon prepared defensive positions and is different from the aim of an encirclement, which is to trap and destroy enemy forces. So it's just getting them to change their plans, to get them to have to, think outside the box or redeploy people from certain places to here and there and do things differently. The Russians may have intended to encircle the Ukrainian forces in Bakhmut, but the Ukrainian command has signaled that it will likely withdraw rather than risk an encirclement. ISW, I will continue, assesses that Ukrainian forces are far more likely to withdraw than to become encircled, and that the Ukrainians might still be able to hold their positions in Bakhmut if they choose to try. Russian forces have been suffering high casualties in these advances, and Ukrainian commanders' assessments of the likelihood that they can force Russian attacks culminate near or behind their current positions, balanced against the risk of losing access to essential withdrawal routes, will likely guide the Ukrainian decision to stay or pull back. Exactly. So I think you're probably on the edge of whether it's still worth controlling or not, which is why there are lots of people saying, oh, they should pull out, and other people saying, it still makes sense. And it almost seems like the Ukrainians are dithering. They're not obviously not dithering, but it's just a cusp situation. Indeed, the Russians haven't really made a huge amount of progress yesterday over the last 24 hours. So Syriac maps here. The only kind of increase in territory that they have is here. Situation south and east of Bakhmut. Russian army continue combing operations in the city and secured new areas of Zabakhmutka district, including the dam of Pivdeny Pond and new areas of Sobachivka district from other axes. So you've got some increased area here, and then a little bit south, just north of this reservoir, which I'll show you on my map in 2 ticks. So you can see there in the eastern suburbs, just to the east of the river, and to the south, north of Opitny down there. So if we come out, I will return to there. There have been some gains for the Russians in this area and this area here, just to the south and the east as well. But really not a lot else as far as map changes that I can work out. The ISW says geolocated footage posted March of 4th shows Ukrainian forces striking Russian positions on the east bank of the Berkivka reservoir, indicating that Russian troops have made advances about 5 kilometers northwest of Bakhmut. Ukrainian Eastern Group of Forces spokesperson Colonel Chervati stated that the situation in Bakhmut is difficult but under control, and remarked that Russian forces blew up the bridge that connects Bakhmut and Kromova to the west. So that's interesting that they claim the Russians did that. Yesterday we understood that the Ukrainians had blown the bridges up. ISW has observed geolocated footage of the Kromova bridge on March 3rd, and that indicated that Ukrainian forces destroyed the bridge to inhibit Russian movement to the west of Bakhmut. It continues. Russian sources widely claim that Ukrainian troops are withdrawing from Bakhmut, but the certain elements remain of Ukrainian elements remain in the city. Wagner Group affiliated mill blogger noted that the only remaining bridge out of Bakhmut is a bridge across the T0504 Konstantinivka Chazivya Bakhmut highway in Ivanivska. So that is, say, a bridge here is the only one that's still operational. So that this is really the main road out for them, and this kind of falls into the idea that there is this. The Russians are approaching from the north, so the Ukrainians seem to put a lot of pressure on the Russians down to the south in order to allow them to use this road rather than they obviously made a choice. They said, right, we can't defend both roads, so you got this one at the north here. Now that appears to be under too much duress, so we can use some of these smaller roads in the middle that generally connect like the north and the south. I'm making that up completely, by the way, but essentially the road for them is not. I'm making up exactly where those roads are, but the choice for the Ukrainians was we need to protect this road to get out. Now there has been a bridge blown here, so it could be that they use this road up to a certain point and then use sort of more minor roads from then on. But it might be that the Russians are trying to get a rotation going so that they are moving down to the south here. Ukrainians themselves are moving, or at least gaining some ground further to the south, and it's like the whole map is rotating somewhat to still allow the Ukrainians to be able to defend the city in some kind of meaningful way. But we shall see exactly what happens over the next few days. It's kind of like decision time. Will they hold out or will they do an operation withdrawal? And all the complexities of an operation withdrawal will need to be obviously taken into account. It's difficult to do those things successfully. Russia did a very good one in Kherson. Will we see Ukraine execute a successful operation withdrawal as well here? If we come out of Bakhmut, further down south past New York, Toretsk, Shumi, to Avdiivka, there is fighting all around Avdiivka at the moment. Go to the ISW, all the normal places are mentioned. Tverny, Kamyanka, Vodyane, Pervomaysky, Nevelsky, Krasnohorivka, but also Novokalinove, which is north of Avdiivka, and Krasnohorivka there too. So that is to say, all around here. That's Novokalinova, Krasnohorivka, Kamyanka. Lots of activity to the north of Avdiivka as well as to the south. The Russians are trying to push on to the west here, just around Vodyane, to the north of this water feature towards Pervomaysky, so they can get some kind of encirclement of that going, as well as pushing towards Severny. The ISW does make mention of the footage I showed you yesterday. Footage posted on March the 4th shows a Ukrainian brigade destroying a Russian assault group near Avdiivka, resulting in the loss of 3 Russian tanks, 5 BMP infantry vehicles, and the capture of 6 Russian prisoners. That was a big loss. That is a considerable loss. 3 tanks and 5 IFVs is not an inconsiderable loss in one sort of offensive. So that is a failed offensive, and that goes to show that the figures that the Ukrainians produce for the Russian losses, there is some evidence to suggest that they are at least somewhat accurate. Okay, so we come out of Avdiivka, no territorial changes there that I can make out. There probably is in Mariinka, but there is no other mappers, no other particularly explicit claims about what is going on there. However, there is a geolocated bit of footage. Syriac Maps has that. Let's come out and see what they say. So here we have, where are you? Syriac Maps. Let's go back to them here. Okay, so they mention a geolocated bit of footage. Here we are. New footage shows the intensive combats that are taking place in Mariinka, where the Russian army and DPR forces continue targeting the last positions east of Druzhby Avenue. And here is what they are showing. There's some absolutely terrible footage of Mariinka that's getting out at the moment. By terrible, I mean stuff like this. Just there's nothing left of it. This was a city and is now nothing but grey charred earth and rubble. It's desperately depressing. But yeah, so this is geolocated footage to suggest that the Russians are advancing and trying to clear the Ukrainians out to what Syriac maps claims is the last positions of the Ukrainian army. So here you can see the BMPs, I think, infantry fighting vehicle there firing at some buildings there. That looks like, is that a tank? I'm not sure. But anyway, giving some hassle to some buildings over there. And that's been geolocated to, oh, there you saw the tank just pull out there. The tank has a pop. Just show you that. Yep, there you go. Taking out a position before those buildings. And that has been geolocated to here. I mean, goodness, it's just absolutely flat ground these days. That's the park area that could well be this could well be the park area. It just can't tell, can you? But it certainly looks like that there was once more trees there than buildings. So that's been anyway geolocated to there. They are saying clearing out the last the Ukrainian remnants from this area east of the Druzhba Avenue. So it could be that actually these red lines are now going all along Druzhba Avenue, and that's the new kind of line that separates the two. Still don't know anything about this northern area, where I've had claims about both sides being in control of there. No news, further news about the salient to the north, moving on to the agricultural warehouses and the piggery that's up here. And indeed, there are claims about the south, fighting going around in Pobieda. I can't remember where I've seen it, but there is claims of that. Here we've got the ISW saying Russian mill bloggers claim that Russian forces, particularly elements of Donetsk People's Republic, First Army Corps, are fighting along the outskirts of Donetsk city and in Mariinka. Russian forces did not conduct any confirmed or claimed ground attacks southwest of Donetsk city in western Donetsk. So outside of that, oh, here we go, Pobieda there. So outside of this area, no other fighting really in Donetsk. So Novomerkilivka, nothing being claimed happening there. And then we come on to Vuhledar, but again, not too much information out of there either. And in fact, absent of much detail around Vuhledar, it's just a really quiet day for sources, I have to say. I'm just going to dip into the ISW again for their assessment of the Zaporizhzhia front. I think it's worth talking about. So Ukrainian sources continue to report that Russian forces are trying to set conditions for offensive operations. So I'm going to leave the Zaporizhzhia map open there and just go to this myself and talk you through it. So the Russian forces are trying to set conditions for offensive operations in southern Ukraine. The Ukrainian General Staff reported on March 4th that Russian forces are attempting to improve their tactical positions in Zaporizhzhia and Kherson oblasts to resume offensive operations in some areas. The Ukrainian General Staff has recently changed its language to include information concerning the situation in Kherson and Zaporizhzhia oblasts in the same section, and it is unclear whether these reports refer to offensive preparations in both or just one of the oblasts. ISW has not observed any indicators that Russian forces are preparing for sustained offensive operations in Zaporizhzhia Oblast or any offensive activity in Kherson Oblast. Some Ukrainian officials have suggested that Russian forces could attempt to launch a decisive offensive effort towards Zaporizhzhia city, but ISW continues to assess that the Russian forces do not have the necessary combat power accumulated in Zaporizhzhia Oblast to launch a large-scale offensive in this sector of the front line. Russian forces would be highly unlikely to reach Zaporizhzhia in the case of such an offensive. Other than that, you just got routine sort of fire going on. But I think this is the claim that some Ukrainians are saying that the Russians are preparing for some major offensive in this area somewhere. But ISW says if they do launch it around here, they are unlikely to even be able to get to Zaporizhzhia. If you think how long it's taken them to get to one side of Bakhmut, and then think, well, would they be able to advance this far to Zaporizhzhia and put pressure on a city as major as Zaporizhzhia? I don't know that they would. Certainly, the evidence is not there to support such a claim. And then, really, that's that's the sum of it. It really is quite a quiet day in some respects for news from the front line. So the question is, when it is a quiet day like this, assuming that actually that's an accurate portrayal of what is going on the front lines, when it's a quiet day like this, who does that better support? Who is doing better if it's a quiet day? And my opinion would be that if this is the time of Russian offensive right now, and if it's a quiet day, then who's going to be in a better mood about that? Pro-Ukrainians. So this looks good for Ukrainians, that the Russians don't have the ability to sustain a continued large offensives across the front line. They are stalling. Either they're stalling or they've got some other plan up their sleeve, or they were never planning a big offensive. But if they're not planning a big offensive, then what are they doing in Ukraine? Like, what are you doing invading a country and then just like stopping, going, it might take a break? What are you doing? So there must be wanting something, and if they can't achieve that something, why can't they achieve it? It's a bit like the theory. It's how I see the cruise missile situation. Like, they must be running out of cruise missiles, because if you had cruise missiles and your intention is to do all this damage, and you are doing that, but just not as often as you were doing that, so it is something that you want to do. If you had the missiles to be able to do it, and if you had the better missiles, if you had the best missiles to be able to hit these places accurately, you would be doing it. Otherwise, what are you doing there? Like, you would be wanting to win this war in the best, most economical way that you can. So the fact that there is this extended gap between the saturation missile attacks, and the fact that you are using missiles that are less optimal, suboptimal, like S-300s in a ground-to-ground program, means to me is super clear evidence that you don't have the missiles to be able to do what you want. So, applying that logic here, that you are stalling, that you are not making ground in a time when you are supposedly on the offensive, is evidence that you are unable to commit to meaningful offensives. You just don't have the capability or capacity to successfully engage with the Ukrainians and take vast amounts of land that you need to do if any of your intentions are going to be met, assuming that those are your intentions. And if they're not your intentions, i.e. to take the Donbass, that's not your intentions. Again, what are you doing there? Like, what are you doing in Ukraine if you're not intending to take meaningful amounts of land? I just don't get it. So, well, I do get it. I absolutely get it. So the conclusion for me is that you don't have the capacity and the capability, again, both those things. You don't have the sheer number of troops that you're going to need to win an offensive, and they don't have the equipment they need. They don't have the capability, which means the types of weapons, and enough of those weapons in order to, and by weapons I mean equipment, tanks, IFVs, bridge laying equipment, all this combined arms stuff. They don't have enough of this to do a huge offensive and take land, because otherwise they would have already done it. That's my theory at the moment. Anyway, I'd love to know what your opinion is. Let me know if I'm wrong. If you think I'm wrong, why am I wrong? What might Russia have in store? Where is their second echelon? Where are their extra troops? Where are their extra pieces of equipment? I showed you earlier on IFVs or APCs with naval turrets secured on top. What does this tell us about their equipment and the state of their equipment and the range of stuff they have at their fingertips? Am I wrong? Why am I wrong? Am I right? Do you agree? Let me know. Anyway, that's the end of the Frontline update for the 5th of March 2023. Thank you so much for your support. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thanks so much to the members. Thanks to people that help me out and buy me a coffee and PayPal. You are truly, truly appreciated. Thank you. And I have pre-recorded the rest of yesterday's extra video that'll be going out a bit later. I'm doing a live on my philosophy channel this evening UK time, so I'll be preparing a little bit for that. Come and pop along and watch that if you're interested in me talking about the philosophy of religion. If you're not, it's okay. It's a free world. You can do what you like, or at least for most of you. Uh, Toodle bits. Bye bye.